Hi everyone, this is CAT 2021 RC drill, test 4. Let's get started. So in the first paragraph of this passage, author tells us about a popular view that Matisse and Picasso were considered competitive rivals. But author refutes this opinion and claims that they were more than just rivals. Their relation can better be described as an exchange or an artistic conversation. In the second and third paragraphs, author gives us examples to prove his point. He talks about Picasso's painting Large Nude in Red Armchair and tells us that it was basically a mockery of or a parody of Matisse's earlier painting, OT or Dallas with a tambourine. Okay. Then he tells us that in his turn, Matisse also responded to Picasso's suggestive painting, Woman with Yellow Hair. And in this particular painting, Picasso had tried to teach Matisse how to change his style, or maybe he had hinted or suggested that he changed his style. It is time for him to change the painting style. In the third paragraph, author tells us that Matisse responded to Woman with Yellow Hair by implicitly criticizing some of its aspects in his painting, The Dream. So that was the kind of exchange, artistic exchange that these two great painters shared. It was not just a rivalry or competitive rivalry, it was more than that. They also, in a sense, influenced each other's art. That's what is implied in the paragraph. Let's look at the questions. Primary purpose of the passage is to, okay. Option A, discuss two best painters of an epoch. Author never claims that these were the best painters of their era. Extreme answer choice. Option 2, to evaluate a theory and endorse a revision to that theory. Okay. The word theory here refers to the popular opinion mentioned in the first paragraph that Matisse and Picasso were competitive rivals. That was the popular theory, popular opinion. But author revises that opinion, he refutes it, and he suggests that they were more than rivals. That is the gist of the passage. Therefore, yes, he is evaluating a theory and refuting it. In a sense, he's endorsing a revision of that theory. He's proposing that the theory be revised. Okay. Option 3, to compare the selected works of two masters. Well, author has compared selected works, but that is not the main idea. This is a narrow point of discussion. The examples or the selected works mentioned in the passage are basically supporting examples, and they support the main point, which is that these two painters shared healthy exchange of or maybe not so healthy exchange of artistic dialogue. So that was the idea here. Option 4, the primary purpose is to show that Matisse's work is more sophisticated. You cannot generalize it. Such a statement is made only in regard to the last painting mentioned here, The Dream. That was more sophisticated maybe, but in general, was Matisse's work more sophisticated, and that too than whose work? So option 4 has two problems. It does not tell us the second entity of comparison. It also is a gross generalization. This point has not been made as a general statement. Question 1 answer is option 2. Question 2, the author would most likely agree with which of the following statements? Okay. Option 1 says artistic rivalries are more like Olympic competitions than professional sports. This is the very opinion that author has challenged in the passage. So this is opposite. Author says that artistic rivalries are not just competitive rivalries; they are more than that. They influence the rivals' art as well. Option 2, artistic rivalries generally last for decades. From the passage, we only know that Matisse's and Picasso's rivalry lasted for more than a decade, but we cannot generalize it. Do artistic rivalries generally last for decades? There's no evidence for us to assert this. So, this generalization, or we can say alien idea, we don't know. Option 3, artists must be good conversationalists. As the author, again, it's a generalization that artists must be good conversationalists. Has the author maintained such a view anywhere in the passage? No. So this is also alien. He has not tried to dictate terms here at all. Option 4, artistic rivalries can actually be reciprocally nourishing, which means beneficial to each other. That is exactly what is explained in the last two paragraphs as discussed in the synopsis. Picasso's woman with yellow hair, provoked Matisse to change his style, and Matisse also accepted it. And maybe he tried to teach Picasso a lesson again. So it is they are reciprocally nourishing for both the people involved. Option 4 is the correct answer. Which of the following describes woman with yellow hair? All right. Option 1, it was parody of a work by Matisse. It was not a parody of a work by Matisse. In fact, that parody made by Picasso was large nude in the red armchair. Conversely, Matisse made a parody of this particular work by Picasso later. The painting's name was The Dream. So The Dream, Matisse's work, was a parody of Woman with Yellow Hair. Woman with Yellow Hair was not a parody of Matisse's work. Option 2, its colors were not rigidly tied to its form. Now, this idea has not been ascribed to this painting, Woman with Yellow Hair. In fact, this idea has been attributed to The Dream. Here he says, the patches of yellow on woman's blouse refuse to be contained by the drawn line, which means its color were not rigidly tied to its form. This is true for the painting The Dream and not for Women with Yellow Hair. Factually incorrect. Wrong attribution. Its color palette was larger than that of The Dream. Now, author does mention here that while painting The Dream, Matisse excluded garish green. He edited it out because he thought that green was gaudy, garish. He edited it out, which means woman with yellow hair had one extra color, green. Yes, therefore the color palette was larger. Its color palette was larger than that of The Dream. Option 3 is correct. Option 4, it was a response to a work by Matisse. Again, converse of what we need. Matisse responded to the work through his painting, The Dream. Woman with Yellow Hair was not a response to Matisse's work. All right. The passage indicates that option 1 says, large nude in red armchair conveyed a sensuous, rich mood. Okay. The sensuous, rich mood, this property has been attributed to Matisse's painting and not Picasso's large nude in red armchair, which means this is factually incorrect, wrong attribution. Option 2, Matisse verbally commented about woman with yellow hair. Not mentioned anywhere, alien idea, that he vocally commented on Picasso's painting. Matisse worked on The Dream for nearly a decade. Now, Please note that his painting came after a decade of Woman with Yellow Hair, but that does not mean that he worked on this particular painting for nearly a decade. He might have, started 6 years after Woman with Yellow Hair and might have completed the work in 3-4 years. So we don't know that. Therefore, did he work on this painting for nearly a decade? Again, factually twisted, distorted. Picasso was younger than Matisse. Okay. Here, it was written that Picasso's painting had an image of a woman, which was a direct attempt to master Matisse's style and to suggest to the older artist. So who was this older artist? Matisse. The older artist refers to Matisse. So Picasso's painting was a direct attempt to master Matisse's style and to teach this older artist, which implies Matisse was older, Picasso was younger. Option 4 is the correct answer. Which of the following, had it actually occurred during the artist's lifetime, would further support the author's thesis? Now, to answer critical reasoning questions like this, be very clear about what you are looking for. Let me first write down author's thesis. What is the author's thesis? That the relationship between Matisse and Picasso was not just that of artistic rivalry, competitive rivalry. It was more than that. They exchanged a dialogue through their paintings. This is what the author has maintained throughout the passage. Now, in order to support author's viewpoint that Matisse and Picasso were engaged in an artistic dialogue, we need some incident during these artists' lifetime, which reinforces this idea, favors this opinion. Option 1 says a joint exhibition of the two artists' work. It is irrelevant. Even if their works are exhibited jointly, that does not add any strength to the point that they exchanged a dialogue through their paintings. An exhibition is not a dialogue. It does not facilitate a dialogue, really. Option 2, a radio broadcast of the two artists discussing painting. That is exactly what we are looking for, a dialogue between the two. Option 3, a movie that dramatized the competition between the two artists. It would actually weaken the author's argument, because option 3 would, if at all, prove that their relationship was that of rivalry, competition, and not an exchange of artistic dialogue. Option 4, a play that depicted the two artists exchanging dialogue through their paintings. This is tempting now. But remember, a play is also someone else's interpretation it is also someone else's interpretation of their relationship, Matisse and Picasso's relationship. And just because another person believes what the author believes does not lend support to author's belief. We have to show a real dialogue happening between these two men, Matisse and Picasso, to corroborate, to substantiate the author's claim. Just that another person also viewed their, a director, a playwright also viewed their relationship in the same light does not support the author's argument or author's claim, really. Therefore, option 4 does not add much value to the author's thesis. Correct answer, option 2. That's a concrete evidence that they actually shared a dialogue. According to the author, all of the following are true of Matisse and Picasso. except. Okay. Option 1 says some of Picasso's work served as a suggestion for Matisse to rediscover his style. Yes. Woman with yellow hair. It is mentioned here. Woman with yellow hair. In that, Picasso attempted to master Matisse's style and to suggest Matisse that to give him new directions for his work. So it was some of Picasso's work did actually serve as a suggestion for Matisse to rediscover his style. Correct. Because it is correct, it is not the answer, because the question says all of the following are true except. So keep that thing in mind. Sometimes, learners tend to forget the question demand, and they know that this is correct, they interpret the text correctly, but they forget question demand and they mark incorrect answers. That happens a lot, especially with these except wala questions. So be conscious of such questions. Option 2, Matisse frequently painted vivid and sensuous images of women. Okay, interesting. Did he frequently paint vivid and sensuous images of women? Let's see. It was written here that Picasso's painting Woman with Yellow Hair depicts a woman asleep on her arms resting on a table. She is full, which means voluptuous, rich, she is warm, and she is curved. Her head and arms forming. Now, this was Picasso who painted this picture. But in the next sentence, it is written, this image seems a direct attempt to master Matisse's style, which means it was Matisse's style which Picasso tried to copy. So Matisse frequently painted. It was his signature style. So Matisse frequently painted vivid and sensuous images of women. Yes, correct. Can be inferred. Option 3, color in Matisse's paintings were not necessarily contained by the form. It was written for the last painting, The Dream, that the patch of yellow on the woman's blouse refuses to be contained by the line that Matisse must have drawn or painted, which means color in Matisse's painting were not necessarily contained by the form. This can also be inferred, in fact, explicitly mentioned. Picasso and Matisse never vocally criticized each other's work. This may or may not be true. Data is insufficient. Can't say. Author does not mention whether these two men ever vocally criticized each other, and therefore option 4 cannot be inferred. Correct answer, option 4. So an interesting passage and a decent passage. I would say not difficult. Easy to moderate is the level of this particular passage. Passage 2, guys. In the first paragraph, author says that timelines are useful to teach history. They are useful classroom tools, but they are myopic, which means they are short-sighted in representation of history. They are not holistic. Okay. So he points out a flaw in timelines. In the second paragraph, author says the most common timeline in United States, WAK, World Almanac for Kids, stresses more on dates than on the events. So basically the focus is on the dates rather than the events. Okay. And the last 2 paragraphs are important. Author makes a case here. He makes a strong statement. He says, it is important for us to also understand the implications of these timelines. They also send an impression that, number 1, events chosen must be significant. That is why they have been chosen. But author says there is no clear thought, however, why these events have been chosen at all. Second, timelines also suggest that the representation of events is official. This is the official stand. The government agrees. This is the government stand on events. Third, timelines also imply that the events are independent. So if on a particular date this particular incident is written, this event happened, and on another date this particular event happened, they also in a sense imply that these events were independent, which author actually says is not the case always. That's what he's implying. Read between the lines. Author says these are the implications of timeline, which are not right, basically. Okay. The next implication is that only one significant event occurred in a year, and the final implication is that American history is mostly about wars. So these are the implications of these timelines, author says. And then he concludes by saying that timeline is a dangerous tool for classroom teaching, which means he says all these implications are fallacious, they're flawed somehow. These are not correct implications. Timeline is a dangerous tool because it assumes that students will be able to see through these false implications, and they will not really believe them. They will be able to see through them, essentially. So all in all, in a nutshell, author is against, he's not wholeheartedly in favor, let's just say. He's not wholeheartedly in favor of using timelines as a classroom tool for teaching history. That's the idea. Okay. Question number 7. The author implies which of the following? Option 1, dates are not important in history. No. Author says events are more important than dates. He implies, in fact, that events are more important than dates. Timeline, the problem with timeline is it emphasizes upon dates more than on events, which means he's not saying dates are not important really, but maybe events are more important than the dates. So this is factually incorrect, distortion of fact. Option 2, historical events are complex. Author does imply that historical events are complex and they're always interconnected. Now, this is an extreme word. Author does imply that historical events are not independent. That's a false implication of timelines. So they're not always independent, but he does not say they're always interconnected either, but there could be a connection. So always is extreme. Option 3, implicit messages can be as important as the explicit ones. Absolutely correct. The last 2 paragraphs are about implications only, implicit messages, right? A study of American history that does not include wars is incomplete. Now again, this is a fact that author criticizes. Author says it appears through timelines as if the entire American history is about wars, and he's not happy with it. The tone is that of disappointment or criticism. That's what he says. That is why he says that this is a dangerous, timelines are dangerous tool. So author does not believe that study of American history is incomplete without the study of wars. If at all he believes the contrary, he thinks that wars are, maybe given undue importance in American history. They should not be given as much importance. It appears that the entire history is about wars. So this is, in a sense, opposite to what we need, contrary to what we need. Okay. The author's attitude towards timelines can best be described as, we need a negative word, and we need a word, to be precise, we need a word which means critical. So he's not wholeheartedly in favor of timelines. So let's look at it. Option 1, condescending. and impertinent, too much, extreme. He's not insulting timelines. He's calling them inadequate. That's all. So condescending is insulting. That's too much to say. Suspicious and resigned. Okay. He might be suspicious, but he's not resigned. He's not saying don't use them at all, or he's not totally against timelines. He says in the first paragraph, in fact, that timelines are important tools and they are one of the most commonplace classroom tools. They present a concise chronology of events, so they are useful, but they are myopic, they're short-sighted, maybe they're not holistic, they're not complete. So 2 also goes out. He is cautious, very, and he is in a sense warning of the dangers involved in using them as classroom tools. Yes, in the last sentence, author does say that these are dangerous tools. So he is portentous, he is very cautious. Okay. We need, remember, for tone-based questions, for attitude-based questions like these, we need some tangible evidence in the passage for our answer. It can't just be a feeling that author feels this way. It can't be our feeling. We have to have some tangible evidence for our choice, for our selection. Okay. Option 4. He thinks that timelines are, he's negative and complacent about timelines. Negative, maybe yes, but complacent means jaisa hai, vaisa hai. He does not care. Does he not care? He has written one whole article trying to tell us about the flaws in using timeline as a classroom tool for teaching history. So of course he cares. To say that he does not care is wrong, right? Author would most likely agree with all of the following except, all right, option 1, there are more than 64 important events in American history. Will the author agree with this statement? Yes. Author says only 64 pieces of American history are presented, which means he thinks that there are more than 64 important events. Okay. Option 2, some students, author believes some students ascribe importance to prominent graphic position. Okay. He writes here that, they present a concise chronology with dates and events listed in a linear narrative. Also, he writes here, they often take a prominent position over a whiteboard or across a wall. And they are, one of the most commonplace classroom tools, therefore. If they are taking a prominent position, it implies that, students do ascribe importance to prominent graphic positions here. That is why author says it is as something which occupies that position, it is one of the most important tools. So author does think students ascribe importance to prominent graphic positions. Option 3, timelines have some positive uses. Yes, author definitely agrees with it. He says they present a concise chronology with dates and events listed in a linear narrative. And they also, they are useful in allowing students to gain a cursory knowledge of many key moments in the past. So they have some positive uses, author would agree. Unofficial histories have no merit, quite the opposite. Author criticizes the fact that timelines present history as if it is the official position. Therefore, unofficial histories have no merit. No, according to the author, unofficial histories could also have merit, is what he wants to say, if at all. So option 4 is the correct answer. According to the passage, a problem with timelines is, okay, option 1, their prominent placement in classroom. That's not a problem. Author has never mentioned it as a problem. Okay. Their lack of context. Yes. That is what author says. They have a bare bones structure. They are very fact-centered. And therefore they are myopic and they eclipse the significance of why and how something happened in the past. Why did it occur and how did it occur? Which means they lack context. Timelines lack context. Option 2 is the correct answer. This is alien, that they have an infinite nature and they are factually inaccurate. Author has never claimed that they are factually inaccurate. They are limited, but they are not inaccurate. So factually incorrect. Which of the following could be substituted for the word myopic in the first paragraph without changing the meaning of the passage? All right. Clearly, the meaning of the word myopic here is short-sighted. Author criticizes timelines and the entire system of education for being myopic in nature, in the sense that it is short-sighted, it is not holistic, it does not cater to or does not address all the factors, all angles, all aspects, which means parochial, which is a synonym for the word short-sighted, myopic, etc., should be the correct answer. It was mainly a vocab-based question here. All right, which brings us to passage 3. Another important passage, a piece of history for you. In the first paragraph, author says, he describes reasons for Queen Mary's criticism. He mentions 2 reasons that Queen Mary received such harsh criticism. First reason, increased literacy rate and number of publications. So people started reading, and that formed the basis or foundation for criticism, etc. Second reason, some scandal that he mentions, the diamond necklace scandal in the first paragraph. In the second paragraph, he starts telling us more about the scandal. He says, a queen's lookalike beguiled some Rohan into procuring a diamond necklace in queen's name, and then the queen got Rohan arrested, but the aristocracy, the citizenry was not very happy with this decision, and they protested. Rohan had to be set free, but queen's reputation had gotten sullied by then, and this queen's reputation, bad reputation, had far-reaching consequences for the monarchy itself. So monarchy also was jeopardized in a sense. So this is the overall passage. Let's look at the questions. The second paragraph of the passage serves to do what? Clearly in the second paragraph, author has described that diamond necklace scandal, right? So let's see the options. Option 1, to elucidate further. Second paragraph elucidates further the impetus, which means the driving force behind the public criticism for a public figure. This public figure refers to Queen Mary. Disdain means criticism. Impetus means the reason or the driving force. So is the author explaining further the factor, the reason, the driving force behind public criticism of Queen Mary? Absolutely correct. Option 1 should be the correct answer. He's explaining how scandal, made the queen unpopular. Is he contrasting 2 factors that spurred criticism? Is he contrasting something at all? Not at all. Is he detailing reasons for the queen's unpopularity as well as the consequences of that unpopularity? This part is alien to the second paragraph. The consequences of this unpopularity have been described only in the last paragraph, fourth paragraph, and not in the second paragraph. So this part is extra. Option 4, discuss the results of a famous scandal. Again, same thing. He is not discussing results or consequences. Option 1. According to the passage, readership of books and pamphlets increased in the late 18th century because of what reason? The readership increased. Why? Okay. So here are the reasons. Author says literacy rose greatly over the course of the 18th century. So people, were literate. Literacy rates increased. And as a consequence, the annual output of printed publications also increased. Okay. In fact, the output of publications tripled. Okay. Another reason mentioned is royal censorship had also been greatly reduced by this time. So all the bans that the monarchy imposed upon published material, the bans were also reduced, the number of bans. So these are the two reasons. Literacy was one reason, and the other reason was reduction in royal censorship. Okay. Option 1, the education of women nearly doubled, not mentioned categorically about women. Option 2, the literacy rate tripled. Now this is a tempting choice, but it is factually distorted. The literacy rate did not triple. The output of publications, the number of publications or the total output of printed publications tripled. Literacy rate did not. So this is actually a nice catch. Option 3, there were more exciting scandals. Where does the author mention that there were more exciting scandals to write about than there had been in previous times? Again, alien idea. Government censorship had relaxed. Exactly what this sentence tells us. So this was the reason. Each of the following is true of Rohan except that, okay, that he committed forgery. Wait, did he commit forgery? He was actually beguiled by a lookalike of Queen Mary. He did not commit any forgery. That woman, the lookalike, the Behrupia, did. So option 1 should be the correct answer. This is not true of Rohan. He had social ambitions. Yes, this was mentioned here. A social climber named Rohan. So he had social ambitions. He wanted to climb up the rungs of social ladder. He had support from the populace, common people, citizenry. He had support. It was written at one point 10,000 people came to the doors of the prison where he was kept, and he demanded his release. Therefore, he had support from the populace. Correct. He was beguiled. He was misled. He was cheated into helping a crime. Yes, exactly what happened to him. So yes. Author suggests that Queen Mary, okay, option 1, undermined the monarchy. Undermined means weakened the monarchy. Last paragraph, that is the essence, as discussed already. Her bad reputation had inescapable consequences for the monarchy. Therefore, yes, option 1 should be the correct answer. She never met Rohan. Can't say. Not mentioned. We don't know whether she met or this is beyond the scope of the passage. Had unlimited legal power. Sorry. Again, can't say. Not mentioned. She was never liked as a queen. Well, now this is a tempting choice. It was written in the first paragraph that she was criticized severely and all. But wait, there is an extreme modifier here. She was never liked as a queen. Was she never liked as a queen? It was written that probably no mistress or queen ever suffered, such harsh criticism as this woman did. That does not mean she was never liked. Maybe at one time people liked her, and for some reasons they started disliking her. This is again extreme. We can't say whether she was ever liked or not. Author's tone could best be described as, okay, is the author arrogant? Not at all. Is the author prim, neat and clean and gaudy at the same time? Does not make any sense. Is he thoughtful? Yes, he is. And he's disinterested. Wait, do not confuse this word with uninterested. That's a different word. Is the author uninterested? No. He's interested in writing, obviously. But disinterested does not mean uninterested. It means unbiased. Neutral. Has the author given his opinion about the queen throughout the passage, about the subject of discussion? No, he has not. Author only tells us about people's opinion about the queen. He merely acts as a narrator, as a reporter. That's it. Therefore, yes, he is writing an unbiased, neutral piece. He is thoughtful and disinterested. He is analytical. Yes, he is. Enthusiastic. Where do we ever find any evidence in the passage that he is enthusiastic? Therefore, correct answer option 3. All right. Brings us to question number, passage number 4. A moderate read, this one. In the first paragraph, author introduces a person and his work. This guy, John D'Amelio. And author tells us that John D'Amelio in his essay argued that industrial capitalism led to independence and choice, independence of and choice for laborers. They were free, okay, because of industrial capitalism. But in the second paragraph, he tells us JD's critics have a different viewpoint. They think laborers did not have a real choice. They were not really free. They could not negotiate. They did not have any negotiating power, really. In the third paragraph also, author mentions critics' objection. Now, please note, author is not objecting to JD's assertions. He's only telling us about critics' objection to JD's work. So some critics have also claimed that JD was wrong about the impact of industrial economy on the significance of home. Women did not break free from home. They did not become free. In fact, they were chained further. And as economy moved from home-based economy to industry-based economy, women lost their economic significance as well. This is the reality which critics point out, and they oppose, they object to JD's opinion, which is to the contrary. Okay. Let's look at the questions now. Structure of the passage can best be described as, all right, a theory is described. Yes, JD's theory is described, so this part is correct. First paragraph does describe JD's theory, and supported by additional. It is actually contradicted by some by citing some critics or some studies. So this is opposite to what we need. A theory and a screed against it are provided. Screed is a rant. If you don't even understand rant, critical statement or a critical speech, criticism. So theory is presented and then its criticism is provided. Now that might sound correct. However, please wait. There's an important point to consider here. A theory and a screed against it are provided. Author does not provide one particular criticism against JD's theory. In fact, there are multiple critics mentioned who criticized JD's work. There's no one particular rant or criticism mentioned in the passage. Therefore, this is not correct. Factually incorrect. There are more than one. Option 3, a theory is presented, followed by a collection of opinions that challenge the theory. Absolutely correct. A collection of opinions that challenges the theory. Option 3 should be the correct answer. A theory is discussed, okay, and its author's credentials are questioned. JD has not been personally attacked by any of the critics mentioned. So author's credential, JD's credential, are not questioned. His theory is questioned. So this is factually incorrect again. Okay. The passage suggests that one argument presented against D'Amelio is based on what? Okay. Is there any argument based on identity politics? Not really. What is identity politics? You identify with which group or which sect of people, maybe communal politics or that kind of politics. Author has not talked about religion, community based discrimination or something like that happening in the workplace. Is one argument based on ethnocentrism, which means ethnic identity? Not really. There's no such argument mentioned against JD's theory. Sexism, now you might think that, okay, there was talk of women, and Davis argues that women were the losers and they lost economic significance. But it was not because of gender discrimination. It was not because of sexism. It just happened. So it was not gender discrimination or sexism. That led to weakening of women's position, economic position, or economic significance, so to say. So sexism is also not mentioned, factually incorrect, twisted. What is semantics? Semantics means meaning or definition of something. Now, one argument presented against D'Amelio's theory is that, D'Amelio might be interpreting the word free in a wrong sense. And the sense in which the word free should be interpreted is that they're free to look for jobs, but they're not free to negotiate their salaries, etc. So one argument presented against JD's theory is that he might have misinterpreted the meaning of the word free when he says free laborers. So semantics, yes, one argument is based on semantics, the meaning, the sense of words. Nice question, this one. In second paragraph, author mentions Lowell girls in order to prove what? Let's see. Here he says, in the previous sentence, author has mentioned that the so-called free laborers were not really free to negotiate a settlement, to negotiate a salary settlement. They have very little ability to affect their salaries, their own their own earning capacity. And then he gives us examples of Lowell girls and other such companies, organizations, which means these organizations must have exploited the laborers, and laborers might not have been able to negotiate a beneficial salary settlement with these companies. That's why Lowell girls has been mentioned as an example. Option one, this is called pre-thinking. Before you look at the answer choices, make sure that you think about the correct answer. Option one, he mentions Lowell girls to illustrate how industrial capitalism eroded women's economic position. Well, this point was not about women. This point was about laborers in general. So this was, this is not really, this is too specific. All right. Option two, he mentions Lowell girls to challenge an assertion about the importance of home-based economies. Again, that's not the purpose. Home-based economies are not even mentioned in the second paragraph. They mentioned the third paragraph. So this is also not the reason, not the purpose. To rebut the arguments of D'Amelio's critics, no. In fact, to support D'Amelio's critics' argument and to rebut the arguments of D'Amelio, if at all. So this is opposite. To support an assertion that workers' autonomy or freedom was more a myth than a reality. Exactly what he's trying to achieve. Our pre-thinking also led us to this idea. Finally, the last question. Author suggests Davis would be most likely to agree with which of the following. Okay, Davis. All right. So here is the guy. Here here, here. Okay, so second half of the latter half of the last paragraph does mention, Davis 3 times in 3 sentences. Let's see. Will you agree with this idea, option 1, that industrial capitalism leads to independence and choice? Not really. It was D'Amelio who believed. The critics did not believe so. So opposite. Would you believe that minorities in particular had little freedom of choice? Has Davis mentioned anything specific about the minorities being disadvantaged? Okay, let's see. He says Davis spends a great deal of time discussing the continuation of labor in the home, in stark contrast to D'Amelio's assertions, where D'Amelio argues that industrial capitalism equated to freedom from the home. Davis argues that it actually equated to thickening the bars of caged housewives to the home as productive and reproductive labor, split further and more distinctively apart. Davis argues that women were the losers in a double sense, but he does not mention anything about minority at all. So this idea is also not ascribed to Davis, alien. Will Davis agree that people without economic roles are disadvantaged? Yes. Last line he says, as their traditional jobs were usurped by factories, the entire economy moved away from home, leaving many women largely bereft of significant economic roles. So yes, Davis does believe that people without economic roles are disadvantaged. He says that the use of the word bereft, devoid of any significance or significant economic roles. That's correct. Does he believe that home-based jobs still account for a significant percentage of the overall economy? Quite the opposite. In fact, Davis argues that economy shifted from home to industry to factories. Factories usurped their jobs. So home-based jobs still account for a significant percentage? Not really. It was, I think, D'Amelio's belief more than Davis's belief. All right, guys. Hope you fared well on this particular exam. Keep practicing. Keep improving. Happy learning. See you next time.